everyone. Welcome to the Breaking Moment podcast. My name is Regine Bowe, and I am a social worker who wants to give you hope, encourage you, and help you feel less alone in your healing journey. This podcast is dedicated to helping you heal, learn, and grow to become a better version of yourself. Through education and personal experience, I will discuss topics around mental health and spirituality. So, let's get started on today's episode. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Breaking Moment podcast. I am your host, Regine Bowe, and I know it's been a little while. I think we're going on 3 weeks. It's just been, one of those months, and yeah, but we're here, and I'm super excited. Sorry, I'm losing my voice. But super excited to be talking with you guys again. It's always a pleasure to jump on the mic and talk to whoever wants to listen to the Breaking Moment podcast and hopefully encourage you, hopefully teach you, hopefully help you feel less alone in your journey. And so today we're going to be talking about anxiety and talking about tools to help manage anxiety. So before we get started, I just want to say that mental health affects everyone. It really does not discriminate on your color, whether you're white, black, you're mixed, you're Hispanic, you're Latino, you're Irish, you're Mexican, like whatever. No matter what you are, anyone can experience mental health struggles, mental health illnesses, no matter what. And it doesn't matter your status, like whether you're married or single. Some married people can struggle, some single people can struggle. And it doesn't matter, where you are, whether you're high class, low class, middle class, whether you're rich, whether you're poor, whether you have a degree or not. I feel like growing up, I didn't really realize that. I guess I really didn't think of it a certain way, but now that I'm older and the more that, you hear celebrities talk about some of their struggles, whether it's anxiety, depression, bipolar, whatever the case may be, it makes you realize that like mental illnesses can affect anyone. And I think the more we understand that, the more that we realize that it is something that it sucks. But all we can do is our best to manage it and, get the help that we need so that we can deal with it. And no matter what you're struggling with, there's always help out there. No matter how bad you think it is, there's always help out there. I realized that as someone that struggles with anxiety, I had so much to say about today's episode. I had so much notes and stuff to write down, and I just think that it's a lot, and I don't want to overwhelm you, because when we feel overwhelmed, then we can't really grasp what the concept is. So I think I'm going to break this episode into two. I'm going to say that from straight up from the beginning. I know the last time I did this, I kind of realized I was going a little past my normal time, but I can tell you straight up that this is going to be a lot of information, and but I think it'll help you. I hope it helps you. So I just want to say that it is going to be broken up to part 1 and part 2. And so we'll just get started. So managing anxiety, tools to help us manage anxiety. I want to talk about what anxiety is. Everyone has different definitions, and I just want to talk about what it is and kind of help you understand, what's going on when you're experiencing anxiety. Like what's going on in our brain, what's going on in our body. And I believe that'll help us because, at least for me, I know that when I'm able to understand something, then I can be more compassionate towards myself through that thing. So I hope that it helps you. So we're going to learn what anxiety is. We're going to learn about some symptoms of anxiety. We're going to learn about some tools that can help us with anxiety. And then, of course, we're going to finish with some scripture verses that help those that are struggling with anxiety and worry. I'm going to talk about the definition. So according to www.mind.org.uk, anxiety is what we feel when we are worried, tense, or afraid, particularly about things that are about to happen or which we think could happen in the future. I really like this definition because anxiety is really based on fear about or uncertainty or worry about something that's going to happen or something that we think, that's a big thing, that we think could happen. It hasn't happened yet. So here we are in the present moment and we're anxious because what could happen or what is about to happen. Just keep that in your mind. I just think that I like this definition because it talks about what could, but then what we think. And a lot of times what we think could happen doesn't happen. I'm not saying it never does, but that's where the anxiety cycle continues, is because we keep thinking that same thing's going to happen over and over and over and over and over again. The article always says that anxiety is a natural human response when we feel that we are under threat. It can be experienced through our thoughts, feelings, and physical sensations. I wanted to share that because anxiety really is a normal response, right? So, a lot of people use the example of if a bear is running at you, of course you would be anxious because your mind is thinking, "Oh my goodness, if this bear your body sees it as a threat." Of course, a bear is completely a threat, right? It's coming at you, your adrenaline's kicking and you need to either fight, flight. I'm sure you guys heard of it. Fight, flight, freeze or whatever, right? That's normal. So anxiety is a normal part of the body. I want us to realize that because some of us might experience it in a different way, but it is a part of our body. It created for us to keep us safe. It's created for us so that when we see a threat, we know what we will figure out what we need to do in that moment. So keep in mind that it is a normal human response, but it can become a little unnormal when it maybe is you see a threat as a person. Maybe you see the threat as being in social gatherings. Maybe you see the threat as being alone. Maybe you see the threat as being in a relationship. Maybe you see the threat as these other things that don't quite equal up to a bear attacking you. And that's just because of maybe some of the trauma we went through. So I want us to keep in mind that anxiety is a normal human response, but it can consume us when maybe it isn't working in a way that is in normal survivor mode, I guess. The normal would be like the bear, the lion, someone's running at you with a knife or something. Of course, you're going to be threatened and you want to protect yourself. But when it's like, oh, I'm going into a party or a social gathering and your anxiety is cranked up almost equivalent to if you were seeing a bear. That's where's the difference when people struggle with like those anxiety disorders, generalized anxiety, social anxieties, separation anxieties, different things like that. So, according to psychiatry.org, anxiety disorders differ from normal feelings of nervousness or anxiousness and involve excessive fear or anxiety. So, that's the real difference. It's excessive. So even if I'm going to probably use the bear example a lot. A lot of people use that. But if we use the bear example, right? Okay, the bear was there. Say we got away. Boom, our anxiety levels kicked down. But when we struggle with like anxiety disorders and stuff, it's excessive. So maybe it keeps happening. We don't know why, or maybe we know why, but it's continuous. It takes forever for our bodies to kind of re-regulate. And it's not a bear attacking you. It's just you're alone and now you're anxious because maybe you have trauma with being alone, or maybe a certain person in your relation and your family did something to you or said something to you, so you're anxious around them. Or maybe you're in anxious with relationships because relationships haven't really been the best for you, and maybe you've experienced things in them that have contributed to your trauma. So it's when we experience excessive fear or anxiety. Anxiety disorders are the most common of mental disorders. So if you're someone that says, I'm struggling with anxiety, and you say, I'm the only one in the world, I want you to know that that's the most common mental disorder. So a lot of us struggle with it. Some that may know, some that may not know. Maybe after this episode, you're like, oh my gosh, that's me. That's okay. It doesn't have to be a life sentence. It's something that you can manage and learn to work through. The article also says that anxiety affects nearly 30% of adults at some point in their lives. So what does that tell you? You're not alone. So now that we know a little bit of statistics, we know the definition, we kind of know that we know the difference between the normal anxiety where the bears, we see the threat, we're running or we do whatever, we hide, boom. Then the anxiety goes away because we're safe. But for someone that has the anxiety disorders and constant anxiety, it's a little different. So I want to talk about what happens to our body when we experience anxiety. So this is a lot, but I'm going to break it down the best way that I can. So we have something that's called an autonomic nervous system. And when we experience anxiety, it causes our sympathetic nervous system to activate. You have your autonomic nervous system, and it's broken down into parasympathetic nervous system and sympathetic nervous system. So our parasympathetic nervous system is what we consider our rest and digest. So in our parasympathetic nervous system, I kind of like the example that health.harvard.edu use. They kind of think of it as a break. And it's the response that calms the body down after a danger has passed. So that's our rest and digest. So parasympathetic is the rest and digest. It's the break. It's the part of us that kind of calms down after we've experienced all that anxiety. So that, that's our friend after we've just been through an anxious moment. It calms us down. So then you have your sympathetic nervous system. And this is the fight or flight. I'm sure you guys have heard of that term. The fight or flight response. And this is when our body has that burst of energy so that we can respond to a perceived danger, such as the bear, such as the lion, right? Or some of our traumas. Maybe it's the relationship. Maybe it's, going into crowds. Maybe it's public speaking. Maybe it's, taking the test. Whatever it may be that causes you anxiety, our body will get that burst of energy, right? So that we can respond to that perceived danger. And a good example that Health.Harvard used is like a gas pedal in a car. So the sympathetic nervous system is like the gas pedal in the car. So it's telling you to go or to hide or to run away, whatever it is. And then your parasympathetic, which is the rest and digest, is the brake. It's causing you to calm, like to stop. It causes your body to rest and calm down. So now I'm going to talk about 4 trauma responses, right? So for some of us that have trauma, and remember, trauma is anything that you've experienced that negatively impacted you. So someone else's trauma might be sexual abuse, but someone else's trauma might be emotional abuse, right? Someone else's trauma might be rejection of, not fitting in. And someone else's trauma might be, physical abuse. Like everyone's trauma is different. There's no specific thing of how someone's trauma should be. Everyone grew up differently. Everyone experienced trauma differently. So boom, here we go. Here's the sympathetic nervous system, right? And we have the fight, flight that we've probably all heard of. But there's also freeze and fawn. And I want to talk about those because if you're like me, maybe you haven't experienced much of the fight response, but you might have experienced the flight response, or you might experience the freeze response, or you might have experienced the fawn response. So I'm going to talk about them and go in depth a little bit about them so that we understand. So there's 4 trauma responses according to the www.webmd.com. So there's fight. I'm sure we can kind of guess what that is, right? It's when we fight. A fight response is our body's way of facing any perceived threat aggressively. Maybe it's arguing back at someone that is threatening your integrity, threatening you. You might argue back, or you might physically fight back. If that's more of the aggressive, I'm going to fight, I'm going to argue, I'm going to do these things. Flight, think about you take off with an airplane, you flight, you're running away. Your body urges us to run away from the danger. So you might not fight a bear. I wouldn't. I might run away from the bear, So you might flight away. So say one of your trauma responses is arguments, maybe arguments because in the past you've dealt with someone that's narcissistic and they've always brought you down. So maybe in an argument you flight. Maybe you don't want to talk about it. You say, "Hey, I need time. I don't want to talk about it." You run away from the situation. And with flight, when we experience flight, it means our body urges us to run away from the danger. We might experience those avoidant behaviors or running away behaviors. For example, maybe becoming a workaholic to distract yourself. So maybe you're dealing with so much trauma at home that instead of fighting and arguing and stuff like that, you avoid it by staying at work from 9 to 9, just constantly being at work because you don't want to deal with the trauma and the frustration of home. Or maybe an example is you're trying to be a perfectionist to avoid the criticism. You don't a criticism maybe causes you to be traumatized because of what you went through growing up. So you become a perfectionist so that you can avoid someone criticizing you or giving you positive feedback. Those are examples. So then there's the freeze. I mean, we could kind of figure that out, right? Freeze is your body's inability to move or act against a threat. We kind of dissociate. We kind of experience the numbing emotions and withdraw from reality. So maybe you see a bear and you don't even know what to do. That's normal too. So you might not fight your way through it. You might not flee away from it. And maybe you're freeze. Maybe you just kind of like dissociate from the moment. Like you don't know what to do. Your body's overwhelmed. You don't know how to react. Maybe you were in an abusive relationship, or maybe you were in households that were abusive, and your reaction is to freeze because it's a lot for your nervous system to absorb, and you don't know what to do. So there's the freeze response. And then fawn is something that's like new, like newer research has been put out about it. Like even when I remember in school, I don't remember hearing about fawn, but the more research I've done, I've seen that fawn is a trauma response. And I'm so glad that they found this, because some people might, you know, not fight, flight, or freeze because maybe they haven't worked. And the thing about fawn is research says that usually when the other three don't work, people might do the fawn response. So fawn response is your body's stress response to try to please someone to avoid conflict. So this is more of your people pleasing. Maybe you're over agreeing with people. Maybe you have a lack of boundaries, right? So example, this is over apologizing for something you did not do. Or maybe you have a hard time saying no, or you always prioritize someone over yourself. Let me tell you, as I was doing, as I've been in therapy, I've been trying to figure out which one I am. And the more I was able to find research on this for the podcast, I think, and I looked it up, I think you can experience more than one, because I think that I was a flight. So I would kind of overwork myself or avoid the situation. But I realized that maybe when that didn't work, I would fawn. And I became a people pleaser because that was how I got out of those difficult conversations, or the uncomfortable conversations, or the rejection I felt. Like if I can just please everyone, if I don't have the boundaries, if I always say yes, then they'll like me, or maybe then I can fit in with them. Because my trauma is different than yours. So some of my trauma is the rejection, because I didn't fit in. I did not fit in with anyone. I was really like most of like high school down, a little of college, not all of college, but I didn't fit in. I just felt like I just didn't, and I can't explain it more than that. And because of that was triggering to me. That caused me to go and fight, flight, or flight, is when I felt like I didn't belong, because I felt that way since a little girl. So that triggered me. So what did I do? I would either flight, and I would overwork myself and overdo things, maybe whether it was sports or work, whatever it might be. But then I realized that, yeah, I still did that. But then when that didn't work, I would fawn. I would people please. I would say yes to everything. I would over agree with people. I wouldn't say no to people. And I didn't have any boundaries because I wanted to fit in so bad. I wanted people to accept me for me. So that could be your situation, or maybe not. But that's just an example of that response. So, my trigger, like I said, is when I feel like I don't fit in. And whereas your trigger might be your parents. Your trigger might be going into large crowds. Your trigger might be anxiety with relationships. I don't know. But that's something that I want us to sit with and figure out, and it's going to be uncomfortable and it's going to be triggering, but I want us to do this because the more we understand about ourselves, the more we can deal with it and accept it, so that we can grow with it. So when I realized that I struggle with these things, at first I was upset and mad, and I was in denial, definitely, like, no, I'm not these things. But then I was like, I struggle with this. But now that I know that I struggle with it, I can figure out, okay, what's the best way to approach a fawn response? What's the best way to approach a flight response? And now I'm learning to not be so reactive in those moments, because it's automatic, kind of, right? Think about it. Our autonomic nervous system is broken into the parasympathetic and the sympathetic. So when you see the trigger, so when I see the rejection or see when I don't fit in, boom, I'm in alarm. That's my threat. So then I'll go into the flight. Let me overwork so I don't have to deal with it, or let me people please so that I can fit in. But now that I'm aware of it, I can tell myself this is a trauma response. I label it as that. I don't have to people please right now. I don't have to overwork. It's just my body is in that moment that it thinks I'm still that little girl that didn't fit in. It still thinks I'm being rejected, but I have to remind myself I'm 25 now, or this is not the same time as before, and I can give myself the compassion that I needed as a little girl, and then I don't have to react in the same way I did. And that's how we overcome it. Obviously, if it's a normal response, like you're running from a bear, do all you need to do to get at the moment. But when we have these trauma responses, we have to deal with it a little differently. So we now learn what anxiety is. We learned what the autonomic nervous system is, how it's broken up between parasympathetic and sympathetic. We learned about the trauma responses such as fight, flight, freeze, and fawn. And now I just want to talk about what's happening. What causes us to get there, right? Because it's like, boom, we go from, when we're in an anxious moment, we can go from 0 to 100 real quick. We're chilling, and then our heart's racing. We're sweating. We're panicked. We feel like the world's coming to an end, right? Like it just feels like so much. So I just want to explain kind of what's happening. So when we see a perceived threat, and I want to say perceived because, like I said, what I perceive as a threat might not be the same thing as you perceive as a threat, but it's a threat to me in my well-being, because at one point it overwhelmed me. Maybe as a child, it caused me great distress. It negatively impacted me. It caused me to be fearful, whatever it might be. So what happens is when we see the perceived threat or danger, eyes and ears see it. Information is sent to the amygdala, which is that part of the brain that contributes to our emotional processing. Once the amygdala interprets the images and sounds of what's happening, when it perceives a danger, it instantly sends a distress signal to the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus is like a command center. It's the part of the brain that communicates with the rest of our body. And that's the part that alerts the autonomic nervous system, which controls those involuntary bodily functions such as our breathing, our blood pressure, our heartbeat, and all those things. So, I know that was a lot, but that's what's happening with your body. So our body's perceiving the danger, our amygdala, and it's sending a signal to our amygdala, which is the emotional processing that's saying, oh, there's a threat, sends it to the hypothalamus that then says, oh my goodness, you're in danger. And that's when it creates, and that's when we have an increased cortisol level and we have an increased adrenaline. And the reason why we have that is because, remember, our body is creating this so that we can protect ourselves from that perceived danger. And it's crazy how it's just autonomic. It really is just, it happens like that. And because it traumatically affected us at one point. And because it traumatically affected us at one point, our body is going to constantly protect ourselves. And one way that has helped me to be compassionate towards myself is me saying to myself, my body is just trying to protect me. Because maybe that little girl was scared in that moment. Because maybe that little girl, it was overwhelming for her to experience that. And when we can find compassion with it, we can overcome it. Because it's all about reprogramming, reteaching ourselves, not being so reactive to it. Because once we realize what's really happening in our bodies, that even though it feels like, oh my goodness, something bad is happening, I can sit with myself and say, you know what? This is just my body trying to protect me, but I don't need protecting. And we can sit with that uncomfortable feeling. It's going to be uncomfortable. It's going to be weird. It's going to be so many things. I'm going to tell you that. But it's possible. And I say it's possible because that I am still in recovery of just anxiety, just crazy anxiety. Like I'm in recovery. But I can tell you that every day is different. And it's about sitting with yourself. And, I'll go into depth about the tools soon, but like, I just want you to know, like, I know this is a lot of information, but I want you to know that your body's just trying to protect you. Don't, and I think once we can get to a point where we're compassionate, not angry because we have the anxiety, but just to sit with it and say, you know what? My body's just protecting me. It thinks right now a bear is attack. Like, that's the equivalent. Like, and that's the thing about the brain that I'm also learning is like, the brain doesn't really realize whether this happened when you were 3 versus when you were 20. It sees that same danger and is protecting you. Oh, I forgot one other important thing of the brain. So when we're in the fight, flight, or fight, flight, freeze, or fawn, when we're in that trauma response, get this. So boom, we talked about the amygdala and the hypothalamus. Now I'm not sure if you guys have heard of the prefrontal cortex. And the prefrontal cortex is the part of our brain that controls our impulse control, our decision making, our planning, our executive functioning. It controls all those things, how we come up with ideas and we execute the plans. Guess what happens when we are in fight, flight, or flight? When we are triggered, guess what happens? Our prefrontal cortex shuts down. So that's why it's hard to distinguish, is it a real threat or not? Because the thing that helps us to make decisions, whether right or wrong or true or not, is shut down because our body is in that survival mode. That's what it is. It's surviving in the moment because you had to survive maybe when you were 10 and it happened, and now you're 30 and it's happening because you're in survival mode. So I think the more we realize the facts, this is facts, this is what they say, is happening to our bodies when we're triggered in that survival mode. Our prefrontal cortex shuts down, our amygdala is sending signals to the brain, sending to the hypothalamus, who's telling us, hey, there's a danger, you need to do something. And that's why we feel these things. You're not crazy, nothing's wrong with you, it's just your body protecting you. And all you can do is tell your body, hey, I'm good. This isn't really a bear attacking me, this is a trauma response. This is me experiencing something that traumatically happened to me when I was 10, and you know what? I'm not there anymore, so I can overcome it. I can overcome this. I can do this. So, I wanted us to just know what anxiety really is. That it is normal, but it can be unnormal when when we have those anxiety disorders, when we're in survival mode and a bear's not really running at us or a car isn't really coming at us, but we're experiencing trauma and we're experiencing one of our trauma responses because of something we went through that traumatically affected us. So, some of the symptoms, according to www.who.int, an article from World Health Organization, some of the symptoms of anxiety are trouble concentrating or making decisions, feeling irritable, tense, or restless, experiencing nausea or abdominal distress, having heart palpitations, which is kind of when your heart goes fast, it's pounding, it's fluttering, sweating, trembling, or shaking, when we have trouble sleeping, having a sense of impending danger, panic, or doom. So that's kind of what that article talked about, but I want to talk about some of the things that I experience, and maybe you have, or maybe you haven't, maybe you have different ones, right? So I will experience like a lump in my throat. It literally feels like something's in my throat and it won't go away. No matter if I walk, it's there. No matter if I get dressed, it's there. No matter if I eat, it's there. It's just like this lump that just will never leave. I also experience racing thoughts. The way that helps me kind of distinguish between my anxious moment versus my present moment is I'll say like, I'll separate my thoughts. So I will say that they're, anxious thoughts or racing thoughts, but I won't allow myself to connect with the thoughts, because if we do connect with racing thoughts when we're in a panic mode, we're going to believe everything we think, because our body's in that survival mode and we're thinking all these thoughts. We're going to believe that there's so many dangers there when there's really not, right? So I experience those racing thoughts where it's just like the what ifs, like what if this happens, what if that happens, oh my goodness, oh my gosh, what if this happens, what if I don't make it, what if this, what if that. And thoughts are just continuous. Like, I mean, it's just rapid, but also they're heavy. And what I mean by heavy for me personally, and this is how I describe it with my therapist, is that it's hard to not connect with them. Meaning, there's times where if I'm regulated and I'm thinking things, I'll just let myself think them and not really like attach myself to them. But I notice that when I'm anxious, it's harder for me to not attach to them because my mind is in survival mode. So I'm believing everything I think. So my thoughts become racing, but they also become heavy. Like this feels like a weight in my mind that I continuously keep attaching myself to the thought, believing the thought that it's going to happen. I feel a weight in my chest. That's the best way I can describe it. Um, what's crazy is once you are able to ask yourself these questions, I, it helps you to separate from it because I couldn't explain this feeling before until I started going to therapy and asking. I was asked questions that made me think about it and process it. And it literally, you have a dumbbell, a weight, or some type of weight. It literally feels like that's on my chest. It doesn't feel like necessary. Sometimes my heart races, but sometimes it's just a weight is just sitting there, and it's so frustrating because no matter what I do, whether I'm at work, whether I'm walking, whether I'm praying, whatever I'm doing, it's just a continuous weight that's just holding you down. And it's so hard not to focus on the weight that feels like it's holding you down. Like I don't know if anyone else has felt that way, but it just feels like a weight on your chest. Maybe you feel yours um somewhere else, but this is like I said, I'm just going to talk about some of the things that I've experienced. Dreading the day. This is definitely a big one where it's just like, oh, the day, what am I going to have to do? Your brain is constantly thinking about what you have to do or what you haven't done. You're thinking about the list that you have made. You got to get up, you got to feed the dogs, you got to take care of your family, you got to go to work, you got a presentation, you got to, like, you're just sitting there dreading the day because you have so much to do. The excessive fear and worry, it's excessive. We know the difference between a normal worry, like, okay, you have a presentation, I get it, you're going to be worried about maybe speaking, but maybe it's excessive. Maybe you don't have the presentation for a whole year and you're already excessive. You're already ruminating about it. You're already trying to plan how it's going to happen in your mind. And guess what? You can't control the future. So as much as you sit and try to plan, I think there's a difference between being prepared, like, okay, I'm going to have my notes. Like, for example, the podcast. I have my notes about what I want to say. But I can't sit and ruminate about everything that's going to happen because maybe in the moment I want to say something different, and that's okay. And I think like our people that struggle with anxiety is we want to overly prepare. We want to ruminate about it. There's no ruminating because we can't control the future. We can sit here and plan to the T about what we want to do, and none of that happened, you know? So excessive fear and worry, trouble breathing, think about when your cortisol and your adrenaline's pumping and you're in survival mode, your heart is racing, right? So you might have trouble breathing. Another thing I experience is the inability to focus on anything else but the worry. So that's kind of like the ruminating. I can't stop. Like I'm like hyperly focused on what I'm worrying about. So if it's, going in public, or say it's the relationship anxiety, I'm so focused on the relationship. Or if it's sometimes being around people my age triggers me because I didn't fit in with people my age growing up. So sometimes I might focus on if maybe I have a gathering or something coming up where I know I'm going to be around people my age. That's my trigger because that's trauma that I went through where I felt rejected or I didn't fit in. So I had the inability to focus. I only focus on that, and I can't focus on anything else. So like say I still need to do work and I still need to take the dog out and still do these other things, but it almost feels like my world is consumed by that thing. That's something else I experience. So we went through a lot. Um, we've talked about what anxiety is. I broke down what's happening when we are experiencing anxiety. What's happening when we are experiencing a trauma response, right? And what happens when we're in survival mode? All these things. I talked about that. I talked about what happens with our brain. I talked about what happens in our bodies. I talked about some of the symptoms that you can experience when you experience anxiety. So I think we're going to stop there because I don't want to overwhelm us. So, in closing, I just want us to know that, despite what you're going through with anxiety, whether you just found out that you have it, whether you are on this journey of 10 plus years, 5 plus years, 1 year of just dealing with debilitating anxiety, you're so fed up, you're so frustrated, you're tired of being fearful, I want you to know that it's okay. It's okay to feel it. I know that it's frustrating, you know. I do. Like, sometimes I say I don't know what you're going through. Sometimes I don't know. But I do know that anxiety sucks. It sucks so, 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 so much. It's so frustrating, especially when it's, not the bear running at you. Like, we're not going to be mad at our anxiety for showing up when a bear is in front of us and we're trying to protect ourselves. But yes, we're going to be a little annoyed when it shows up every day we wake up. When it shows up when we're just trying to hang out with our friends, when it shows up when we're just trying to, when we're trying to do something new but it's uncertain. We're going to be annoyed when it shows up when we're in relationships and it brings back our traumas with relationships or whatever. So yes, it's frustrating, but you're not alone. As it said, it's one of the most common mental illnesses. So you're not alone, no matter how much you think you are. You are not. And no matter how bad it is, because let me just tell you, sometimes when you experience it, it's one of the worst feelings, because it just, your world is so panicked and all you want to do is run from it. You do. And it's hard. It's so hard, but you're not alone, and we're going to get through this together, guys. And I hope that, the more you know about it, like I said, this is something that has helped me. It may not, but once I learn what's really happening, and once I am able to, have that compassion that my body's just protecting me. It's not being mean. It's not that I'm crazy. It's not that I'm a weirdo. It's just my body's protecting me, because, this was something that stressed me out or caused me to be in survival mode when I was little. And it's all about relearning and reframing and sitting with uncomfortable. And I just want you to know that it's possible. I am living testimony that it's possible to manage your anxiety. And every day is different. Some days it's super bad. The last 2 days have been good, knock on wood. But this 3, 4 days ago, I was experiencing such bad anxiety. I was just so over it. I just wanted to cry. I wanted to be done. So it's gonna happen, but it's about how we respond. Remember that one episode I have about the importance of choice. We have a choice to still believe that we're in that moment, or we can sit there and say, you know what, I know this is a trauma response. I know that I'm experiencing an alarm right now, and it can overcome it. And so, like I said, I'm gonna stop here. And so when we come back in 2 weeks, I'm gonna talk about some of the tools to help manage anxiety. I have some good tools that I hope that'll help you. um I'm gonna also talk about part of the tools. There's this book that I want to talk about with this guy named Russell Kennedy that I mentioned before in an episode, that has really helped me with my anxiety. I also want to talk about some scriptures, because I'm a believer, and God. Sometimes when we just don't know how it's gonna happen, sometimes we just have to have faith that things are gonna get better, and God is the one that's gonna help us get through it. And so I want to help us with some scriptures, because all these things have helped me, and I hope they help you. The physical parts of doing things, the mental parts, the spiritual parts have all helped me to become a better version of me, and have helped me through the worst times of my life, have helped me with the best times of my life. So I just want to share it with you, and I hope that it helps you. Um, so in closing, I love you all, and I want you to know that you're not alone, and that you matter, no matter what you're experiencing, what mental illness, disorder, physical disorder, whatever you're going through, you're not alone. And as bad as it feels, and as bad as you feel like you're not important and you don't matter, you matter. Your voice matters. You're in this world for a reason. And I just hope that, you are able to realize that. I hope that you're able to see that sometimes the things that are in our lives that hurt us, that cause us pain, can be the thing that propels us to the next thing. All right, guys, I will talk to you soon, and I hope you have a good rest of your day. I hope you have a good rest of your week. Bye. I'll talk to you soon. Thank you for listening to the Breaking Moment podcast. If this information was helpful, please share it with others. And if you enjoy listening, subscribe to the podcast so you can get the latest episodes. You can listen to the Breaking Moment podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts.